The member for Waite.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I move that this bill be now read a second time. Sir, corflutes, love them or hate them, they're part of our political cycle at the moment. And I think for all of us in this House, not so much in the other place, I don't think they really know much about corflutes and putting them up Stobie poles, but I know you do, sir. For the local government, that's true. They had to be corralled to do that. They were wondering what they were talking about. But we all know on this side, in this chamber, the perils of dealing with these corrugated plastic signs. In my view, and in many of the community, all the political advertising, nothing is more notoriously hated by our community than election posters come election time. Members of the public are all too familiar with being bombarded with our faces, all stacked together on Stobie poles during the lead-up to an election, quite often illegally placed, breaching local government regulations, too close to traffic lights, cable ties everywhere, metal wires sticking out, people on ladders on the side of the road trying to get a right balance at just after midnight on a Friday before the writs are issued. We all know the perils of just after midnight, Member Elizabeth. I wouldn't think you would ever go after 6 p.m. on a Friday night. The perils of putting up posters to usher the dawn of an election period. They are scattered alongside of the roads. These plastic posters do not. They provide a distraction to drivers, but also are a polluting mess that pose many negative impacts on our environment. Mr Speaker, this bill sets out to remove the number of electoral advertising posters displayed on public roads and heavily reduce the hundreds of thousands of corflutes that end up in the waste each election cycle. And I think, especially on the Saturday of each election, we see the increased amount of these plastic corflutes adorning, for want of a better word, polling booths across the state. And even worse at federal elections as well, where you see metres and kilometres of plastic wrap being used for the day and for 8 hours and then being disposed of after, and to think all of that goes into the landfill. Mr Speaker, the negative impact on our environment is one of the key imperatives for this proposed change in legislation. I often ask the question, what happens to the corflutes of an unsuccessful candidate who does not run again in the future? Or those corflutes that graffitied or damaged? That is always a really big issue. Besides local school art teachers who come to my office after each election asking for a pile of corflutes, most often or not they are discarded. We all know too well what happens. Inevitably, these posters are discarded. We already are battling the war on waste, and the election posters, in my view, are an unnecessary added pressure to our waste system and environment. As the Attorney recently said in her second reading contribution in a similar debate not that long ago in this place, corflutes are without doubt detrimental to the environment as there are limited recycling options for them, as acknowledged by the Australian Greens on their website. Polypropylene is not widely recycled, with only two main recycling methods: mechanical recycling, which is complicated, and recycling through chemical methods to break down the corflute. And in order to suspend the advertising, they require cable ties and other fixings, which often get cut and left on the side of the road. While we all try to reuse, repurpose, donate and or recycle corflutes, but is all too often that during an election they become damaged and weathered. Then, of course, there is the incentive to develop new corflutes with modern design elements, updated photos and new taglines. Think about all the effort that has gone into banning single-use plastics, the effort from us parliamentarians, the business community and the individuals. Why can't we have the same perspective when it comes to the use of single-use signs? We all know single-use plastics, without a ban, sadly, will continue to cycle through the community. Another major concern includes the diminished roadside safety that corflutes bear by distracting drivers and moving their attention away from important road signage. Once again, as the Attorney raised in previous debates recently, local councils have their concerns about diminished road safety, and personally I find it sometimes difficult, hard not to look at my own face and many other faces as driving around election times when on the daily commute. But when looking and pondering at the hundreds of corflutes I drive by, I concede for such a high cost, these two-dimensional posters do very little to educate voters about candidates, what their policies are and what they stand for. Times have changed since the first colonial elections in the 1850s. Nowadays, candidates and voters have access to numerous tools to engage with constituents. The internet has brought with it websites, social media and other emerging tools for voters to understand candidates in more detail than their name, face and potential party. I appreciate not all voters have access to the internet or choose not to use social media, but there are still many other tools for candidates to use. Door knocking, letterboxing, community forums, actually being active in the community, and not thinking that they can just roll up 6 weeks before election day and claim some mandate to be part of any community. And I would hope candidates are out in the community, meeting people at events, holding listing posts, door knocking and letterboxing, as I said, the streets they intend to represent. And of course, South Australia won't be the first jurisdiction to pass this ban if successful. Other jurisdictions like New South Wales have already banned corflutes on public property. And so whilst I acknowledge that there is a limited argument that election posters are one method of alerting the public that an election is imminent, it is not the key determinant. And of course that is for the Electoral Commission to ensure that the general public are informed of the need to vote, of where they should vote, and indeed the most professional way of who their candidates are. It's not necessarily for those candidates. In saying all this, private property naturally and as always should be exempt from these rules, and private property owners will be at liberty to put as many corflutes as they like on their private property promoting any candidate. And I know sometimes if you're driving to Melbourne along the Dukes Highway, you might drive past the member for Hammond's corflutes that are probably still there from about 2006. They're a permanent fixture on the road to Melbourne. You pass the big koala. Order. You pass the big koala. You sort of go through Bordertown, and there's also the member for Hammond's corflutes there on the Dukes Highway. So, of course, being able to have corflutes on private property will naturally always be there. And also, candidates will be able to erect up to 6 electoral advertising posters on polling day and include any polling place and within 15 metres of a polling entrance to those polling booths. So certainly at pre-poll and on polling day, there will still be corflutes available as well for members of the public to identify with. And of course, it is not intended for this legislation to ban the use of A-frames, etc., when candidates and members are holding street corner meetings or undertaking poster wavering. So, with the regulations, I believe there will still be electoral posters to notify the public, but there will be limitation and restrictions, so that we need no longer see the exuberant and proliferation of posters that we see every election at the moment. I do hope this legislation passes through this place and the other, and I commend the bill to the House.